Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Elaris,
I am Sandy,
and it is our pleasure to be your MCs for today's TEDx talk. Ladies and gentlemen, as we are about to begin, please be seated. Just a few reminders before we begin today's program. If I could ask you all to please switch off your mobile phones or keep them on silent mode to avoid any interruptions during the talk. Thank you for your kind cooperation and attention.
On behalf of our school, ACS International, we would like to extend our warmest welcome to all of you. We appreciate you taking time off of your busy schedules to join us today.
TEDx Youth at ACS International is an independently organized TED event this year formulated based on the untapped potential of human experiences and the personal development which stems from this. We are pleased to share with you From the Shadows.
Today, you are all in for a treat. We have some fantastic speakers lined up ready to share with you their inspirational, life-altering experiences which have shaped them into the brilliant young adults you will meet today.
To get the most out of this TED Talk, we invite all of you to liberate yourselves of your inhibitions and open your minds. Talk to those around you, strike up passionate conversations, state opinions, ask questions, and be curious. Open up and you'll be sure to leave inspired.
To commence this event, we would like to play the official TEDx introduction video.
Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Now, we would like to introduce our first speaker, Emmanuel Quintus Carter, this afternoon.
Emmanuel is a Year 6 IB student at ACS International, born in America, and lived there for 8 years before moving to Singapore for studies.
He served as the head prefect from 2021 to 2022 and received the IB Diploma Scholarship in 2020 in ACS International. Aside from academics, he was captain of the basketball team in ACS and is a competitive debater and a passionate programmer proficient with more than 7 coding languages such as Java, Python, C#, C, Dart, etc.
Starting at a young age, 6 years old, Emmanuel has released several applications onto the App Store and also graduated from an online Harvard course in computer science, CES 50X. Emmanuel is also an author who started writing at a young age and made his first little series at 7 years old. He has since then published 3 books onto Amazon in the genres of adventure, action, and mystery.
In his speech today, he will be delving into the topic of harnessing rigid expectations and stepping out of its shadow to become better and more positive people. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emmanuel.
Expectations can inspire you or they can kill you. 10 years ago, my parents decided to move from New York to Singapore. And when they broke the news to my brother and I, we were devastated to leave our childhood home and friends behind. You see, when we started attending a Singapore local school and grudgingly wore school uniforms for the first time in our lives, we were immediately surprised by the academic pressure put on us at such a young age. In America, life had been relaxed. No homework on weekends, we had time to play, to explore, to be creative. And when we made mistakes, the school would encourage us to find the right answer and explore. My parents expected an even better education. Their standards were high, and our New York school wasn't meeting them. But boy, in Singapore, their expectations weren't just met, they were exceeded, to a point where we could hardly go out to play at all. And for a clear comparison, here's a playground in New York, and here's a playground in Singapore. So what I want all of you to take away from my talk today is these three main things to redefine your expectations. Reflecting on your current expectations of yourself, challenging negative thoughts, and being inspired by others. So now I want to delve into a quick example of expectations in my life. So I was blessed with the opportunity to serve the school as head prefect last year. And throughout my term, I was expected to be a model student all the time. Now, reflecting on this, I understood that this was an unrealistic expectation because who's perfect? Secondly, I would challenge the negative thoughts. I would often think, am I doing enough as head boy? And it made me understand that I was doing my best, given the time and resources I had. And thirdly, I was inspired by the members of the previous prefect board and the school's leadership team. And this motivated me to work harder to become a better leader by replicating their successes. All right, so now kids my age are getting ready for our careers. But did you know that career expectations can kill you? In fact, a study on Japanese workers by the University of Chicago has proven that individuals often define themselves by their work successes that require over-responsibility, perfectionism, and sustained social pressure to outperform. Ultimately, these so-called model employees crack, and they become depressed because they cannot meet those societal expectations, leaving them susceptible to suicide. Wow, talk about killer expectations. So it's clear, having rigid expectations affects our emotional health. And these are unrealistic assumptions, like having the perfect life or getting the highest grades, damages our self-image and can lead to dissatisfaction, bitterness, and even depression. So harsh expectations like these are the shadows we live under daily, especially when we don't meet them, because it makes us feel like failures, discourages us, and induces high levels of stress, which can contribute to anxiety disorders. So, how can we be less susceptible to these harsh expectations? So first, we need to reflect. Reflect on our current expectations of ourselves and ensure that they're realistic and reasonable. Second, we need to challenge those negative thoughts about ourselves, like thinking that we need to be perfect all the time because we don't. And finally, we need to be inspired instead of comparing ourselves with others. So now I've talked about killer expectations. Let me now talk about the ideal situation, which is to have healthy expectations. So with healthy expectations, this is the ideal situation, which creates a healthy environment for receiving and fulfilling our ambitions. It helps us anticipate for what's good and increases our performance by pushing us to do the best we can and being better. An example of this is how my dad expects me to be a maker and not just a consumer. And in turn, so do I. His expectation spurs me on to make things that I use every day. For example, I read books, and so I've written books. I use apps on my phone, and so I've developed and programmed apps. And these are realistic expectations because they're flexible. I'm not pressured to be a maker all the time. It's also not impossible to achieve because I've had past experiences with these things. And also, he and my family and friends are very supportive. So this is what's called healthy expectations. And how exactly we achieve them is what I'll cover in my next topic. How do we overcome the shadows of harsh expectations? So for me, I start with reflection. Personally, I base my expectations on what God expects me to do, which is to follow him and love him as I love others. Secondly, is to challenge the negative thoughts. So when I feel doubtful of whether I'll achieve a certain ambition or live up to an expectation, this is where I have my LinkedIn profile. And that shows me the games and the books and the courses I've completed, which ultimately reminds me that I can what I can realistically expect myself to do given the experiences I have and the progress that I've made. And finally, I'm being inspired, and I look to makers like Elon Musk, Mark Rober, and Neil deGrasse Tyson for inspiration. And if they can do it, so can you and I. So your expectations won't change overnight, but just be patient, reflect on them, challenge them, and be inspired by them. Be inspired by others, and you'll see the progress. So remember, when you find yourself having harsh expectations, remember to reflect, challenge, and be inspired. That is how you can harness your expectations. Thank you.
Wow, wasn't that such an inspirational speech? Personally, I found it extremely relatable. I think I'm going to make a note of the 3 key pointers about reflecting on my current standards, practicing gratitude, and focusing on myself. I think this will greatly help me and many other students manage expectations about school, sports, music, or any aspects of our lives, really.
Yes, I completely agree. Thank you, Emmanuel. Next, we will welcome our second speaker, Kieran Levan.
Kieran is a Year 6 student at ACS International. He has represented the school twice in the Hague International MUN and worked as a senior logistics officer at Blueprint MUN. Kieran was also a co-organizer of last year's first ever TEDx at ACS International and has a passion for public speaking. Kieran will present on the rewards of taking on challenges and the importance of tenacity through sharing the experiences of his grandmother with TNBC.
The stage is yours, Kieran.
Okay, sorry about that. Um, when I first heard about TEDx's mission statement to find ideas worth sharing in our communities, I thought to myself, which one of my challenges have been the most inspiring? But what I soon realized was that at my age, the people around me in my community and in my family have been through more than I could possibly fathom. And so today, I want to talk to you about my grandmother's battle against TNBC, or triple negative breast cancer, and how to prevent setbacks and challenges from derailing our lives. Okay, sorry. I remember it was just another lazy day when we first found out that my grandmother had TNBC. At the time, she was hospitalized for dengue, and the doctor had called our entire family in, which was not normal. I remember that she had gone for a screening only a few weeks prior, and so on the ride there, everyone was extremely nervous, and rightfully so. I still remember the vice grip that my grandmother had on my hand when the doctors told her that she had TNBC, or triple negative breast cancer. Being quite close to my grandmother, I expected myself to immediately dive nose first into research on TNBC and look at how to help my grandmother improve her life as much as possible through her condition. But what I realized was that when you give a man a fish, you only feed him for a day. But when you teach a man to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. And so I needed to give my grandmother the skills she could have in order to get through this challenge, as opposed to spoon feed her, as that would not be sustainable in the long run. I often half-jokingly told my grandmother that God gives his harshest battles to his strongest warriors. My grandmother was a diabetic, and so we were all extremely worried when we found out that she had TNBC. However, through this challenge, my grandmother has become more tenacious, more knowledgeable, capable, and a risk taker. At the core of her battle I feel like 3 key steps have truly stand out in her journey against TNBC. Firstly, an acceptance of the task and positive outlook, a breakdown of the task and an understanding of requirements, and a willingness to make it work. These key steps are not only responsible for my grandmother's battle against TNBC, but ideally will be applicable in any of the challenges that we face throughout our lives. When my grandmother first found out she had TNBC, she went into denial and completely shut down. Having not faced a challenge that large throughout the course of her life, it made perfect sense that she would shy away from such an endeavor at her age. I remember retrospectively feeling foolishly angry at my grandmother because she didn't accept the challenge head on. But how could she? She needed to take the time necessary to process her condition. Similarly, we need to process and accept the burdens that our challenges can place upon us. When we feel as though we aren't working to our maximum capability, we should ask ourselves why that is so and how we could better achieve our capability or what we expect from ourselves with the burdens that have been put on us from our challenges. Hence, being patient with yourself is extremely important in accepting a challenge and taking a positive outlook. Another thing that happened when my grandmother first got diagnosed with TNBC was that she was unresponsive to doctors, and she let my mother and I update the doctors on her medical history on a week-to-week basis. Of course, it was extremely difficult in such a harrowing situation for my grandmother to take control and to find exposure being responsive to doctors. However, as my mother became more busy with work and my school term started, we weren't available to take her to the hospital anymore. And so, by taking the initiative and having exposure, talking to doctors, my grandmother became more knowledgeable and more receptive to the steps needed to manage her condition. Similarly, she also met a group of people at the hospital who were facing similar challenges to her, which strongly allowed her to advance her acceptance of her TNBC condition. Additionally, many of her friends at the hospital were in far worse condition than her. This allowed her to take a positive outlook, which caused her to be extremely able and willing to take on the challenges that were necessary for her to undergo her condition. So a positive outlook is equally important. Cancer definitely had a mental impact on my grandmother, just as large as the physical. I remember that as my grandmother began to lose her hair and her taste, she told me that she felt she was living in a body that was alien to her. It was clear that her condition and her challenges were becoming overbearing on her, and she did not know how to cope. However, by breaking her challenge down into smaller steps, and by understanding what was required for her at each point in her journey, she was more effectively able to address what was necessary to undergo her condition. For example, recently, she had undergone one of her last chemo sessions in her first cycle, and her growth has actually reduced by half of its original size. So this was a major victory for her in her battle against TNBC, and by allowing herself these victories, she was more effectively able to handle her condition. Breaking a challenge down, likewise, has a lot of merits for us on a day-to-day basis when addressing our conditions and our challenges, because it allows us to manage our expectations and our stresses when doing this challenge. Another experience that I can recall quite vividly is when I had to tell my grandmother that we would shave her head. My grandmother is quite particular about the way she looks, so when I told her that her hair would begin thinning and I would have to shave her head, she looked at me like I told her she had a second cancer that was secretly growing inside her the whole time. I remember that she was extremely adamant at first, but as her hair began thinning, she knew that it was necessary for her to get a wig and shave her head. Likewise, most of the challenges that we'll face in our lives require sacrifice. It's important to realize, however, that these sacrifices are necessary, and by foregoing this sacrifice in the short term, the long-term impacts will likely be even more harmful. It's also important to note that challenges not only make us more capable, but additionally more appreciative of the rewards and the benefits that we have in our lives. And hence, when we forego these luxuries in the short term, we actually benefit even more in the long term, and it's extremely important to understand the benefits that sacrifice can have on our acceptance of a challenge. Once you accept your challenge, adopt a positive outlook, and understand what's necessary at each step of the way, The last step is to simply get it done. It was quite easy for my grandmother to find a willingness to make it work because my ever resourceful mother was on her case at every step of the way. I remember my grandmother telling my mother to stop as my mother frantically typed in every single number in her phone that she knew had TNBC and started referring my grandmother to all sorts of random friends that she had throughout her life who had similar conditions to my grandmother. Working with a team and talking to her new friends made my grandmother extremely capable and willing in handling her challenges. From prior history, my grandmother recently told me that she wanted me to help her Google barley green. Not knowing what barley green was, I assumed that it would be some sort of pseudoscientific drug which had no medical backing. But to my surprise, it actually had a full peer-reviewed paper on PubMed and increased the cell death of cancer cells. I was extremely surprised, and I had to read through the entire paper just to make sure it was legit, which of course it was. It was on PubMed. Another aspect that allowed my grandmother to really deal with her condition was incorporating her challenges into her lifestyle. Once we break our challenges down, it's extremely important for us to understand that these are things that we need to face on a daily basis. My grandmother often says that it's my brother and I that can keep her willing and able to move on and carry on with her treatment on a day-to-day basis. But to me, it's the fact that her life is the fight. The fact that her diet, her hydration, and her chemo are all a part of her 9 to 5 that allows her to so effectively deal with this challenge. My grandmother has inspired me to incorporate my own major challenges, such as my academic challenges, into my lifestyle. If my grandmother can sit through a 4-hour chemo session, how hard could it be to start my work an hour after school or to make sure I get a specific amount of tasks done in one day? Although my grandmother sometimes misses meals or doesn't drink enough water, she makes sure to get enough food in or water in the next couple days or weeks. Likewise, it's also important for us to understand that sometimes going on Instagram for slightly too long or texting with your friends doesn't take away from the hard work and the right things that we do on every single other day. So I hope that by listening to this talk and adopting these 3 philosophies, you guys are able to address any challenges that you might face or that you could put your mind to. Thank you. And get well soon, Mama.
Thank you, Kiran, for that touching speech.
Truly, your grandma sounds like the strongest woman on earth. I can only aspire to be as strong, as understanding, and as accepting a person as her. Her initiative and growth and perseverance are remarkable.
Exactly what I was thinking too.
Next, we will have our third speaker, Piper Yu, who will be joining us virtually.
Piper Yu is a senior at the British School Manila in the Philippines. She is particularly passionate about the intersection between economics, entrepreneurship, and social impact. She is the founder and CEO of Zara Bika, a coffee business that uses sustainable art education to break the poverty cycle and improve the lives of Filipino youth. She's incredibly analytical and seizes every opportunity to create data-driven impact, especially in the lives of those less fortunate.
A few months ago, I read an article that used the band on Titanic's deck as a metaphor for the past few years, the COVID years. And to be honest, while I thought the metaphor pertaining to the act of comforting others, even when their own lives were at stake, sounded like a pretty good metaphor, I didn't realize just how deep it went. You see, this past year has felt like a sinking ship. We're desperately searching for some sort of lifeboat to escape, but there isn't one. That's because everything that's happening to me, to you, the lockdowns, the social isolation, the loneliness, and in some way the desperation to leave is happening to everybody else. It came out of nowhere too, just like the iceberg had appeared in Titanic. No one on that ship had intended to hit the iceberg that day, or they would have planned ahead, right? If we had known lockdowns would put everything on hold, then perhaps we would have been in a much better position to accept it, but we didn't have that luxury. Still, I wanted to acknowledge the difference between the student and the general experience, because the student's perspective on all of this is a little bit different. And that's what brings me to the theme of being in the shadows. As a student myself, I constantly felt the need to be the best, to do the best, to set myself apart and do something no one has ever done before. And when COVID hit, everyone expected that innate competitiveness in students to die down for a few months. And to an extent, it did. I mean, every in person event was canceled, and because no one had time to plan ahead, the realm of virtual experiences was much more limited. But suddenly, in one swift motion, everybody was back on track, piecing their lives together at a pace I hadn't really anticipated. Around me, people were doing such incredible things, participating in international math Olympiads, speaking to professors at top tier schools, taking part in internship opportunities, work experiences. To me, it sounded like everybody was getting their life together. And in an attempt to do the same, I loaded myself with responsibilities that only tore at my mental and physical health. And when I say loaded, I mean loaded. You see, I took up an internship opportunity at a company based in the United States, which, as you know, operates at a different time zone than here in Asia. I also started volunteering at an international nonprofit organization whose meetings and schedules were built around that of the clients and organizations we were trying to partner with. You know, in other words, it meant unpredictability. They would call meetings and I would have to show up to them. That meant my day started at 1 a.m. I'd wake up, work for 4 or 5 hours, take a quick nap before school, and then proceed to sit through an 8-hour school day. My afternoons would usually be spent speeding through schoolwork before it was time for these aforementioned unpredictable meetings that lasted, from half an hour to maybe 2. And this went on for 6 whole months. The reason why I'm talking about this is that even though I exuded pre-professionalism to others, top grades, working as a high school student in an internship filled with only undergrads and postgrads, volunteering and making a difference in society, even with all that, I was empty inside. I was sleep deprived, exhausted, and losing touch with everything and everyone that I loved. All of my struggles were in the shadows. So this is actually the concept of toxic positivity. It was the constant need to maintain this happy, optimistic facade across all situations when I felt everything but inside. It was tearing at me, and I didn't know how to express that because I thought I should be appreciative of these opportunities. I should be making the most of them, but it just didn't resonate. And especially as an IB student, there are just so many points of stress that this is actually a very regular occurrence. We sometimes fool ourselves into thinking that overworking ourselves and pushing ourselves to the edge is the right mentality, is what we should be doing as students. And every time we rest, we feel guilty that we aren't doing enough. That society should applaud us for being so dedicated that we don't care for any other aspect of our life, but this dedication or I guess, obsession with our education. But we all know that our stresses aren't even just limited to our academic successes. There are social aspects, familial aspects, and really every other aspect of our biological, cognitive, and social cultural factors blending in together into this giant ball of stress. So fast forward to early 2021. It's a few months before we celebrate our first full year in lockdown. You believe that? I look in the mirror and I see how much I've deteriorated. I look unhealthy and my brain isn't even functioning well enough to get through the day. It's weird, right? How changes you undergo are unnoticeable between days. But when you compare yourself now to what you were a year or 2 ago, you start to notice how your lifestyle, how what you've done every day in the past year has affected what you've become. The mental agony that used to hide behind the shadows was perfectly visible, and it manifested in a pale, almost zombie-like appearance, eyelids sullen, eye bags large, and a big slouch. I wasn't happy with what I saw. And this was a crucial point because it was the point where I decided that it needed to change. All of my commitments ended soon after. And instead of replacing it with more work, which I would have done had I not had this life-changing realization, I decided to do something more fulfilling. Something that would still take effort and dedication, but allow me to dictate my own schedule and help others in the process. something more fulfilling than working a desk job from 1 to 4 in the morning for the sake of having work experience and for the sake of being at par with my peers. This was Zarabica. Zarabica is something special to me, and I'm sure that each and every one of us has that special thing to us. And for me, it was a nonprofit coffee business that provides sustainable art education to Filipino youth in the hopes that they will be able to break this poverty cycle. So yes, my friends continue to do absolutely incredible things. They found their niche. They found the one activity that brought them joy, but so did I. But I began to follow my own path, developing myself in a different way, allowing me to alleviate all of these demons looming over me and create a really positive impact on my community. In a way, rather than only trying to improve myself, only acquiring accolades for myself and building myself up, overworking myself, I decided to, lift everyone up, to improve the lives of my community. Kind of like the quote, the rising tide lifts all boats, that kind of mentality. So the main takeaway here is that there is a lot of pressure to be a certain way and to do a certain thing. And this idea of toxic positivity, we shouldn't lose our individuality and we shouldn't lose ourselves in the process of following the majority to adhere to this societal construct or societal norm. It's going to be hard. It always is, to stay true to yourself when all of these factors and people around you are discouraging you, they aren't doing the same thing. But no matter how hard it is so important to know yourself, to stay true to yourself and be yourself, care about yourself, your health, your own goals, and those who you love. And so that brings me to the end. And I hope that this has helped anyone, even if it's just one person, to kind of realize the pressures that we go through and find something that really brings you joy in life.
Thank you, Piper, for that groundbreaking speech.
Truly, Piper has talked about a distinctive issue in society.
Now we will have our very own Vidhi.
Vidhi is a Year 6 student from ACS International. She has been studying in Singapore throughout the local Singapore curriculum until she joined ACS International 2 years ago to pursue her IB diploma.
She loves sports and is a national level champion in netball. Besides this, she is an avid softballer, swimmer, and ultimate frisbee player.
Vidhi has been the president of Interact Club in ACS, overlooking several service projects in school, and attained the Group Achievement Award in interest groups as a CCA. She has also been the vice captain of the CKS House. Moreover, she is a music lover and picked up a new instrument, bass, recently.
Aspiring to study business management at university, she will be sharing her journey of how she rose from the shadows of being in a traditional Indian family, overcoming stereotypes to pursue her dreams and interests.
Hello everyone. So my name is Vidhi and here I am today going to share with you my part of rising from the shadows. So before I start off, I would like to ask the audience a question. Does any parent here sitting in the audience want their children to pursue medicine, law, or engineering specifically, or any student themselves who want to do so? Just raise up your hands up high if you want to. Okay, thank you. So to give you a bit of context, my parents hail from a town in Punjab, India, and they came over to Singapore in 2003. So my dad got an assignment here for a month, and all they knew was they're going to pack up the bags and leave in that month. But apparently his assignment got extended, and that's how I was brought up here. You see, the attitudes, beliefs, and expectations I grew up in was sky apart from them. Expectations of me, my entire family of my entire dad's family is the family of engineers. Out of this 20 people, 10 people are engineers, plus one, my dad, who's a software engineer. Moreover, my mom herself is a software engineer, but by choice. See, so who wouldn't think that I would also take up engineering? But before I could even decide what I wanted to pursue, I had already striked it out. Why? Because I had seen them work constantly on the computer screens, always attending meetings at odd timings. It was just very overwhelming to see them that way. My parents thought that this was just something that I thought, and maybe I would change my perception of engineering by the time something catches my interest. But this all started in 2018. Being cooped up in council activities and softball, I did not that big think about what I wanted to pursue in university. Came end of 2019, I had to choose my subject combination, whether I wanted to take physics or biology. From whatever I said so far, I'm pretty sure you can think of what I took. Yep, it was physics. Even though it was my choice, I did not really think that I would pursue it because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And came 2019, my parents popped the actual question. So what do you want to do in university? And I said, oh, maybe chemical engineering or chemistry, basically. But even though I had developed an interest for chemistry, we hadn't been a second when they said, oh, so you know that you're going to be in the lab all day, and this is what you have to do. You're going to be exposed to all sorts of chemicals and radiations. Yep, it's partially true. But was I ready to be in this sector? Do I really want to do research? And so I pushed it to the side, thinking that maybe if I did well in overall, I would actually be able to choose what I want to do eventually. And came 2020, my dad signed me up for an event called the Girls Tech Day. It's held by Amazon for girls who are interested particularly in engineering or any other sector that they're interested in. Well, it was a week's event, and all I remembered from that particular event was driving an Amazon Protus, a robot, around the fulfillment center in order to reach the product to the customer in the shortest possible time. Well, a week's event, and that's all I remembered. Amazing, right? And afterwards, I actually went on to sign up for a course, a cloud computing course, and thinking that maybe if I study something, it might pique my interest. But obviously the answer was no. You see, our brain works in a way that our brain chooses to remember what we want to rather than what we are forced to. By the end of that course, I just found out that I spent so much time thinking that this is what I should do, that cloud computing was the era of business startups, and instead of thinking of what I actually wanted to do. And so the ultimate question was, what did I actually choose in the end? Came 2021, I entered ACS, taking on a new subject called business management. Well, I still remember the first day I entered the class, and the class was preparing a presentation on QU's concept, basically like a background of the business in terms of its maybe culture, its strategy, its innovation, or ethics. Well, the group that I joined was doing Coca-Cola ethics. And this was a slide that I made a change to. And all I had to say in that presentation was sustainability. Today, 88% of the packaging is recyclable, and they have reduced their carbon footprint by 24% since 2010, and now they aim to make their packaging 100% recyclable. Seems easy to say, right? But after having started at 24%, I immediately lost confidence. I was so frantic and embarrassed of myself, thinking that I already made a first bad impression. What's going to happen? Should I change my subject combination? Will I do well in this subject? But as I integrated into live in ACS, I continued to move on, practice and revise every question I saw for business, and had conversations with my dad thinking about what is business startups doing today, what is the market like, what is the stock exchange, how is it going? Well, everyone has their likes and dislikes of a subject. Well, when you're doing really well in a subject, you go, hey, gotta go. And the days when you don't do well, you look at the 12 upon 40 on your first physics test, and you go, oh, I'm probably going to fail this subject again, or I won't do well for it. Well, but for business, it was just so different. It's like no matter how much difficult I found it, there was always a glimpse of hope, or that there's like light at the end of the tunnel. But when you put your mind to it, you don't realize how much effort you put in. By the end of 2022, I was discussing with my dad about the small loopholes I had to cover in my business management paper and how I could do well in it. And the rigor, the excitement, the passion I was explaining it with was none like other. And that's just showed that business was just it. So having discovered myself and what I wanted to do in the future, it wasn't easy for people around me to accept it. I took back 10 years ago, thinking, like, at first it was the tension and dilemma of answering someone who asked the dreaded question, what are you going to do in university? And all I would say is, to be frank, I don't really know it. It's either going to be chemistry or business. And this would be the reaction on their faces. But now that I know what I want to do, obviously it wasn't easy for people around me to accept it. I still remember the call with my grandmother, talking to her about what I really wanted to do. I said I want to do business management, and she replied back saying, "Oh, so you're going to do you're going to non-medical things." See, the stereotype of talking about medical and non-medical got me thinking of whether I was really taking the right decision. This is way that people have been conditioned to believe what success is, and definitely I did not believe that that was success. So, in the middle of all this journey, someone came to me and told me that remember these three things in life. And those were self-control, self-esteem, and self-pride. It took me a long time to decipher what these three meant, but this is what she meant, actually. Self-control. Your actions are equals to your goals. Every step you take is really crucial. Well, yes, I wasn't the perfect child in terms of attitude or discipline or grades, but I managed to pick up the puzzles, like pieces of puzzle in the way, thinking that yes, I will eventually reach my passion, my goal in the long term, and that is the right pathway. And secondly, self-esteem. Be confident in yourself and don't seek validation from others. Well, I did spend most of my time seeking validation from others, thinking that maybe if my opinions are the same as them, I would probably do well, or it is correct. But the thing is, a decision you make might not be beneficial for you. It might benefit someone else, but it's detrimental for you. So that's why all of it ends to the you factor. Well, you are the one who decides what you want to do. You are the one who defines what success is. Last but not least, self-pride. Take pride in your work. Even though you have put in your 100% and someone else does it well, it doesn't mean that you suck. Make sure that you celebrate with small achievements because in the end, they are your motivation boosters. And by that, all I want to say is, in the end, is the you factor, as I just said before. You are the one who's going to look back 10 years later, thinking of whether the decision you made of pursuing what you want was right, whether this is where you define success, this is your happiness, or not. It definitely took me a long journey to discover what I wanted, but it was all worth it. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Vidhi, for that enlightening speech. I'm sure many teenagers sitting in this room can relate to that because I know I definitely can.
Our upcoming speaker needs no introduction.
Samuel Sianipar is a former student from the ACS International Class of 2021 and is now serving his national service in the Singapore Army. During his time in the school, Samuel served in the prefectorial board as deputy head student in charge of the student affairs from 2020 to 2021. Receiving the Leadership Colors Gold Award in the process, he also represented the school as part of the tennis team in the 2021 National School Games. On the academic front, he graduated from ACS International with an IB score of 44 and also topped the level in higher level economics.
Samuel is also an avid photographer and loves taking photos around Singapore during his free time. He uses photography as an outlet to serve others, taking photos for church, school, and charity events whenever he can. Samuel is returning today to his alma mater to talk about comparisons and how we can use them to our benefit to stay focused on our individual pursuits.
Take it away, Samuel.
Afternoon. I'd like to start off today by getting everyone to imagine their dream life. Or it could be an aspect of your dream life. We're basically talking about something that brings you to a level of joy you have never reached before. Maybe you've just scaled Mount Everest. Maybe you just won an Oscar. Or maybe you've finally been promoted to that manager position you had wanted for years. Now imagine if there was someone else. and you see that someone waiting for you at the summit of Mount Everest. You leave the theater seeing that person with 2 Oscars or more. You enter the office to see that the guy sitting opposite you is fresh out of college, but also a manager. Will you be as happy? Chances are, you won't. We all have dreams, we all have goals, and we all have aspirations. And whatever they may be, these dreams can all be classified under the umbrella term of success. The problem with success is that we often fall into the trap of pegging it to how others are doing. You just won an Oscar, which is something that so many people would really wish they had, but to you, you're not successful because someone else who made a movie of the same genre won too. And this happens everywhere in our daily lives as well. One study found that higher earnings of neighbors are associated with low levels of self-reported happiness. That $100,000 paycheck feels a whole lot better if the person next to you earned 50,000 instead of 150,000. Personally, I found this to happen in school as well. You'd sit in maths class trying to decipher the foreign language that is calculus, and the first quiz you get, you are outscored by the people sitting to your left and right. Now that's not going to feel good. And this is when the problems come in. The anxiety, the self-doubt, and the negative thoughts. Surely there's something you're doing wrong. Why is it that you're struggling to keep up while everyone around you seems to be living worry-free lives? Slowly, little by little, the doubts and burdens build up. The stress ends up affecting how you live, and you wake up every morning dreading another day with people who are better than you. And this is when we really start to fall back. Productivity decreases, attentiveness disappears, and we stagnate under the burden of low self-esteem as everyone around us progresses. And now that's one really bad domino effect. The worst part is that we can often find ourselves chasing a moving target. Everyone around us is also improving. We are not the only ones striving to do better. And so you can find yourself in a point where you reach the level of the person you've been comparing yourself to all this time, only to find that they've moved on, and there's a whole new mountain for you to climb. And so the chase continues. A very exhausting chase. So today I'm going to talk about comparisons. How to use them in a way that benefits us, and when to use them. More specifically, I'm going to talk about upward comparison. And that's when we compare ourselves to someone who we feel is superior to us. And this contrasts with downward comparison, which is the opposite, where we're comparing with someone we feel is inferior. So let's dive in. Now, going back to the doomsday example that I might have elucidated earlier, comparing ourselves to others can cause a great deal of harm. And so the first thing that comes to mind is, well, why not compare at all? If, as they say, comparison is the thief of joy, why not remove that thief of joy and have a lot of joy in your life? The thing is, that's pretty much inevitable because we make comparative thoughts a lot. 12% of the time, according to one study. Of course, you could remove yourself from the people around you and live a life of solitude in a faraway place. However, Tom Hanks showed us why that's pretty much not the best idea. And there are also advantages that we lose out on if we don't compare. For starters, comparing ourselves to others, if we have the right response, can propel us higher instead of dragging us down. Here's what I mean. Instead of thinking, they can do it, why can't you? You should think, they can do it, so can you. Now, this may seem like a very minute difference in the wording, which it is, but it makes a massive difference in our mindset. Asking ourselves why can cause us to look inward. It's an implicit self-criticism of sorts, as we start to think, maybe something is wrong with us. And that leads to the domino effect I talked about earlier. Your self-esteem could take a dive. And this also could leave you an emotional wreck, and you could feel absolutely worthless. Now, instead, we should see the achievements of others as fuel to motivate us to do better. Appreciate their accomplishments and believe you can improve, and be confident that you can do something similar to them, if not greater. And through this, you'll be able to push each other to greater successes. Now, 2 days ago, NASA tried to launch this behemoth, the Space Launch System, as part of their Artemis mission to go back to the moon. And that launch was scrapped due to a variety of technical issues, but In the midst of all the media hype and, of course, the customary conspiracy theories, I did some time to do some reading just how improbable it was that we were already able to reach the moon as a human race 50 years ago. Because in 1961, when President Kennedy asked Congress for funding for the Apollo missions, America had less than 15 minutes of human spaceflight experience. And yet, it took them only 8 years for Neil Armstrong to finally set foot on the moon. Now, why am I talking about the Apollo program? Because it's the perfect example for my point about comparing yourselves with others. The US had a foe, and that was the Soviet Union, and they were once embroiled in what we today call the space race, in which each power sought to undo the other in terms of technological capability, with the ultimate finish line being our lunar satellite. Now, NASA didn't have a very good start. History tells us that the Soviet Union was the first country to send both a satellite and a human to space, which are, of course, the stepping stones which you need to go past in order to eventually land man on the moon. However, history also tells us that to this day, not a single Russian has ever landed on the moon. Only America was able to reach the moon. And that was because they were left undeterred by the initial setbacks that they faced. And that's the mindset we need to employ. Life is a marathon with many checkpoints. It's important to distinguish these checkpoints from the ultimate finish line. Doing badly doesn't always mean that you cannot catch up. Sending Sputnik and the astronaut Yuri Gagarin to space did not guarantee that the Soviets would reach the moon first. Likewise, losing out on a promotion to a younger, less inexperienced colleague, for whatever reason, does not mean that he'll be higher up the corporate ladder when the both of you retire. Similarly, not doing well for a quiz doesn't necessarily mean you will do badly for the exam 6 months down the road. So why wallow in self-pity? Sometimes there's no point dwelling on the past as we focus on the future and acknowledge the successes of other people while using it to drive us towards our own goals. And this is what leads to healthy competition. Now, I'd like to ask everyone, if you ever go for a run, would you run further if you ran by yourself or with others? This is assuming everyone around you could run an infinite distance. Chances are, you would run further when you run with others. It could be a casual run, and you could be running with twice the pain that you'd usually be able to bear with, but you will continue to bear with that pain so that you are not the first person in the group to stop running. And there's actually a term for that. It's called the Kohler effect. Nobody wants to be the weak link in a group. And so we can use that competitive instinct to our advantage, as if the people around us are tugboats that pull us along our way. Moving on, it's also very important to note that every human is different. We all have our own individual, unique personalities, interests, and talents that make a person uniquely them. We all are running our own races, and we all have our own timelines, and so there's no guarantee we'll be happy living the exact same lifetimes as the people around us. The exact same lifestyles, sorry. And so this brings me to my second point. There's a time to upward compare, and there's a time not to. To help elucidate my point, here's the example of Jeanette McCurdy. And here's basically an interview of her talking about her experiences acting with Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter Ariana Grande in the sitcom Sam and Cat.
You literally wrote, I frequently made the mistake of comparing my career to Ariana's.
Yeah.
And being jealous of everything, jealous of her childhood, jealous of a music career that you didn't even want.
Sure. I was jealous specifically that she played charades with Tom Hanks. That's what got me. Charades with Tom Hanks.
How dare she?
I know. But I was so young at the time, and I think it's really hard to not compare yourself to somebody at that age when you're in an environment around them all the time. So I made that mistake repeatedly, and I'm glad to be at a place now where I wouldn't trade positions with somebody.
Okay, so two important things were mentioned here. First, we learned that McCurdy was very jealous of Ariana Grande's singing career, even though she did not want it. She knew that the singer-songwriter life was not for her, and yet she continued to make upward comparisons with Ariana Grande, which led to a lot of negative emotions. And so, it's important to not upward compare ourselves with everyone every time. We only stand to reap the benefits of comparing ourselves if their goals align with ours. And this could be in the short term. For example, a test or a competition that the both of you are sitting for or entering. Or it could be in a slightly longer term. As shown in the example earlier, it would have helped Jeanette McCurdy to make such a comparison if, perhaps, she also wanted the singer-songwriter life. Now, what does this mean in the bigger picture? Let's look at what she says next. Having retired from acting and pursued her own path, she says she's now in a place where she wouldn't trade positions with somebody. And that's the mindset we must have. It's good to make our own definitions of what success should be for us, but we should never define success as something that is relative to how the people around us are doing. Everyone is different, which means that the dream of someone could be a massive nightmare for you. And the perfect image that we often see from everyone around us is almost never perfect. We all often see the highs of others, but not the lows. And that's because we naturally and understandably don't want to show our own personal struggles to everyone. But those personal struggles are there. For all you know, the people around you could be looking at you with envy, with the impression that you live a worry-free life. And so the end goal we must have is to find ourselves in a position where we are not demotivated by how the people around us are. Run a marathon of life where you are not racing against other people, but you're racing against the you of yesterday. Always strive to push yourself to be a better person each day, push towards your own unique utopia, and only compare yourselves when it helps you to get there. To wrap up, comparing ourselves to others is like avoiding a charging bull. You have to do and time it right in order to avoid a very nasty outcome. It's important to know the hows and whens of comparing, and it's important to always not compare too often. In fact, comparing yourself every day is often not a good sign. So before making upward comparisons, it's important to ask ourselves whether we stand to benefit from doing such a thing, or if we risk making ourselves feel worse. Now, once the answer is the former, take the small victories and celebrate them. Celebrate that A, instead of being sad that the guy next to you got a mark higher. Use comparisons to inspire and not belittle yourself. Through that, you'll be able to become better versions of yourself that no one can replace, until you're at a point where you will never trade the world to be like someone else. And that, for me, is success. Focus on the ultimate finish line, stay uniquely you, and don't let comparison be the thief of joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel, for that groundbreaking speech. Wasn't that such great advice, Sandy?
Yes, Samuel has indeed taught me how to carry out healthy comparisons in my day-to-day life, and I'm sure such advice has touched everybody's hearts here. Now we will all be having a quick 5-minute intermission before we proceed with the final speeches. Please feel free to take a quick breath and stretch your legs.
Moving forward, we would like to introduce our second virtual speaker, Sai.
Sai is an IB Year 2 student from Nexus International who is presenting his first TEDx speech this year. He has been involved in MUN, doing close to 28 conferences over the past 3 years, chairing 18 of them. He has a passion for a multitude of things, including public speaking, writing newspaper articles for youth-based organizations, and working out. He will be talking about the 3 Ps and how they helped him overcome obstacles in his life and how they can help you too.
Life. It's a roller coaster where you have ups and you have downs. As a young kid growing up, I was called names like idiot, dickhead, fatty, useless, and I believed that I had no brain nor muscle. In addition to that, I was punched a lot in the face and kicked in my genital areas a lot, and that really messed me up mentally and physically speaking. Now that I look back on the memories and the life lessons that I've learned along with it, it helps me make certain life decisions about my future and where I am right now at this moment. Hey guys, my name is Sai, and today I'll be talking to you about the 3 Ps, which are persistence, perseverance, and purpose, and how they can help you solve and get over obstacles in your life. You see this person right here? That's Charles Darwin, if you guys didn't already know. And as a young kid growing up in a pretty rough environment, I didn't quite understand his concept of evolution and survival of the fittest. You see, in my mind, I thought it was mainly for those who kept succeeding all the time and never gave up, or rather, just didn't fall. But when we hit COVID and when we saw a mass number of deaths where it told to record high, that's when I realized that survival of the fittest isn't really for those who keep succeeding all the time, but it's actually for those who are able to get back up regardless of how hard they've been hit. And this leads on to my first lesson, or rather my first life lesson on persistence. One of the quotes that I've learned earlier in my childhood is, if you're going through hell where no one cares about you and you're on your own, keep going because it's going to change. Now you see a basketball and you see a bench, right? Well, let me tell you one thing. Basketball was one of my favorite sports growing up. And in order to create a bond with individuals, I would bring a basketball to school. And guess what? I want to play with them, enjoy the game, enjoy having friends. But no, I brought it to school, and these guys, rather, my classmates, who I thought were closest to me, actually just took my ball away from me and played basketball on their own. And I was left sitting with nothing on the bench. The problem wasn't the fact that I couldn't play with them, or rather just go and play with them. The problem was ownership. I didn't create that sense of ownership in their eyes where I could actually fight for what's mine. In addition to that, teachers and students kept telling me, you are going to be a nobody. And to an extent, I believed it because I wasn't getting good grades and I wasn't playing well, or I just didn't have the physique to play well. And at one point, I still remember this date fondly. It was the 28th of March, 2019. And I was sitting in the classroom with my head down, facing the ground, and telling myself I had nothing. And I have nothing because no one cares about me. No one seems to ask me how I'm doing. So at that point, a voice actually popped into my head. And guess what it said? It said, hey man, look at what you have. You have a house, you have food on the table, and you at least have a chance to go and study. And guess what? That voice was right. It was important for me to be able to use all these resources to the best of my capabilities and succeed. So that's when I changed my mindset. Instead of just crying and pitying myself, I decided to put in the work. I work constantly where instead of studying, or rather besides studying, I would firstly sell objects, or rather sell products that I self-made, sell them for a profit and create a stream of passive income. And the other thing is I would work out, improve my game. I would go into more of a cardiovascular and muscular endurance training where I would work on battle ropes, deadlifts, and learn new things about myself and change my overall body. In addition to that, I got involved in student council, Model United Nations, and World Scholars Cup, where I pretty much begged and asked teachers for a chance to believe in me and let me join the club. After doing all of this, and in the process, there were times when I quit. And that leads on to my third, or rather my second lesson on perseverance. Now, perseverance for you, or you guys out there, is the ability to not give up regardless of how hard things get? Well, as you can see from these list of questions right there, this was all related to a junior NBA camp that my mom had signed me up for in the summer of 2019, where after months training, you would actually have a chance to play with an NBA player, actually rather train with an NBA player. As you can probably guess, I didn't get selected. And these are the list of questions that came to my mind. Now, as you guys can see, there's a utilization of the word he, the pronoun he, in most of the questions, or rather one of the questions. And it's more comparative to another individual outside of myself than myself. You see, I was mad and frustrated, but I wasn't mad because I didn't get selected. I was mad because another individual who was in my school's basketball team had gotten selected. And guess what? He was exactly me. He was fat, obese. So why didn't I get selected? How was he better than me? What's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? Why am I not good enough? Other questions that came rushing to my mind. And as you can probably guess, I quit. Went into a cycle of sadness, self-pity, back again. And for a month straight, I was just messed up mentally and sad, feeling sorry for myself. Until at one point, my mom picked me out of my bed, my room, and was like, go back to work, do the work. And that's when I realized life doesn't wait for anybody. You see, life is a cycle, right? It's continuously going. It doesn't stop. So it's important for us as individuals, as human beings, to get along with it. At times, yeah, it's true. You do get laid back. But rather than getting stuck up on the moment, it's important for us to keep going with it and forget about it and move on. And that's what perseverance really means, having the ability to move on and not getting impacted on all social, emotional, mental, physical levels. Let's take, for example, LeBron James right here. Most of you may know him, most of you may not. LeBron, rather King James, rather, he is one hell of a basketball player. He's been in the league for close to 19, 20 years. And rather than looking at where he is right now, let's look at what he did in order to get to this position. Let's look at his childhood. Let's go back all the way, all right? Back to when he was born, back to when he was a teenager, right? Growing up, he had a pretty rough childhood. It's true. He went from house to house, home to home, and his mom was working full time, right? If he himself had said at that point, hey man, I'm just going to be like this forever, I'm not going to change, or my life's not going to change, do you think he would have gotten to where he is right now? Well, the answer is obviously no, because he had to persevere. He had to create this dream, his ideal vision of where he wanted to be and what he wanted to do and what he wanted to create or impact as an individual. So it's important for us, once again, as human beings, to be able to create that sense, create a vision for ourselves. Because if we don't have a vision, we don't do anything. And at the end of life, we will regret not making the life decisions that we made. Therefore, leading to my third and final lesson on purpose. As I said, without purpose, perseverance and persistence don't work. Because purpose is the direction in which you're headed, right? And along with purpose, along with the direction, perseverance and persistence are lessons that can be learned along the way. As you can see from this slide, good is not the same as great. Now, why do I use this phrase? Well, when I quit from everything because of someone else's accomplishments, I found my motivation, right? I realized at that moment that it doesn't matter what the result is. I'm going to put in the work, right? I'm going to strive to be great, not good, but great, right? So my lesson to you guys is wake up with a purpose, okay? Wake up with a purpose and keep the importance of having a vision at the back of your minds, right? Because without a purpose, we just drift around aimlessly, not knowing where to go, just going nowhere pretty much. As Michael Jordan once said, I can accept failure, but I can't accept not trying. And this guy right here, he is a 6-time world champion, 6 for 6, right? And he said that he missed 9,000 shots in order to get 6 rings. So regardless of what the result is, put in the work, be your greatest self, and think about the vision that you want to achieve, where you want to go. 3 P's, ladies and gentlemen: persistence, perseverance, and purpose. Use them in your daily life, live by them, eat, sleep, breathe the 3 P's, and have a vision in terms of where you want to be, persevere and persist that, and live it every day of your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Sai, for that motivational speech. Don't you feel inspired, Sandy?
Yes, indeed. Perseverance and tenacity is also a part of our school's Ignite values. We will now welcome our last virtual speaker, Marsha.
Marsha Balani is a 17-year-old from India, featured by Indian dailies for her efforts during the pandemic. She's an ardent volunteer for quality education and spends time teaching children from rural India.
Being a proponent of discussion, she is the Secretary General of MUN at Home, mentoring young minds in the art of diplomacy.
A zealous orator complemented by a knack for writing, and above all, she's a fighter with a colossal will to live. She has molded her experiences with vitiligo to instill compassion and awareness.
On the inside, however, she is just another teenager whose one dimpled smile makes an appearance at all the wrong moments.
Please welcome Marsha.
Greetings! I am Marsha Balani and I am from India. And before we begin, I would humbly request everyone to take a moment and go back to the time when they entered this room, or any room for that matter, and think if you ever made an assumption about anything, about someone's age, about someone's profession, or well, if you're a person like me, wondered if they are an Aries. So we can establish that human lives are full of preconceived notions, and externalities are overemphasized ever so often. And that is why I say that my truth lies under the layers of my skin. So I am 17 years old and I have had vitiligo for almost a decade now. And yes, I do know that Michael Jackson had. Regardless, isn't it nice to always have something in common with the king of pop? So now what is vitiligo? Vitiligo is an autoimmune disease, which means that my immune system fights off the melanin in my body, subsequently leading parts of my skin to turn white. Now, at birth, I showed no symptoms, but they began to come forth when I was about 8 years old. This condition affects approximately 70 million people around the globe. And so, some people assume that my condition is contagious, beginning with my classmates in grade 7. The child in me didn't quite understand, and I was quite flabbergasted with the treatment that I received, horrifying me so much that I decided to, quote, wash it off with a pumice stone. And throughout the course of time, I have been bullied and called names. I have been isolated and avoided. Put down by many, I have been told that I am a failure. All of it creates a million self-doubts. I refused to wear short clothes because my skin would throw up. I refused to speak because whenever I spoke, I shivered. It shattered my self-confidence. We went to doctors and to priests who gave me more ointments and medicines than the food on my plate. Medication that would have possibly made me sick with chronic illnesses such as diabetes and hypertension, among others. It was one fine doctor, Dr. Bakaya, who changed my perspective, who counseled me to introspect and made me understand that this was nothing more than an allergy. The wrong medication, the wrong steps, this need to measure up to perfection in your life can have grave consequences. So, what made the change? What made me get up and speak here? I tried. I tried every single day. I did not win every day. It was not a bed of roses. It was more like a forest full of thorns and me, the lost solo traveler. There are days when I still face stigmatization. However, I refuse to believe that a patch on my skin can put me down. I want to help people believe that they do not need a bully to approve of them. You are in charge of your own destiny. You are what you want to be. It broke my heart, every piece of my heart. I refused to speak, muffling my cries amongst their laughs. So I decided to take charge. From being the quiet kid, today I find myself to be one of the most sociable, compassionate, and confident people that I know. And I am very sorry if this sounds like a brag, but I went from the kid who felt powerless to the one that can stand up for others. From the kid filled with feelings of shame and embarrassment to the one giving this speech. Now, despite all these years and despite all these circumstances, it has somehow become a part of me. Acceptance doesn't come easy. So when somebody asks me, how did I do it? This is what I say. Beginning with my parents, my mom is the most optimistic goofball you'd ever come across. And if there's a thing that I have learned from her, it is that if I were to think of what would other people think of me, what would other people do? Trust me, it sounds way more poetic in Hindi. So that was an Indian mom's version of the only opinion that matters about you is yours and yours alone. The second mantra to run out of dams to give is to grab your fear by the neck, look into its eyes, and say, hey, Mr. Terror, you got something new for me. So I was afraid to take pictures, and I decided Instagram was a nice place to model. I was afraid to speak, so I took up Model UN, an extracurricular activity that would make confidence ooze from every inch of your existence. Don't let fear scare you. Make fear you, your strength, and your aspirations. Now, what's even more important is company. What do we think of the people who scare us? The ones who belittle us, the ones who make us wonder, but oh my God, that is my friend, and how do I have no inhibitions? Solitude is scary, but way better than bad company. Don't let anyone tell you what should you do and who you should be. Why? Because nobody should have the audacity to tell you that you deserve anything other than the entire world. Now, trust the process and attract those people. Because somebody said that what you seek is seeking you. And one of such right people told me that this life is a wagon and it will stop at the right station. And meanwhile, to add a pop of color, these are some of the right people in my life, in my journey, and I believe that this would be a nice ode to them. With that, always have something to look forward to. Trivial obstacles will never cease to exist. So learn that new instrument, learn that new language, meet those new people, go out to that new place. I go in every seminar, in every class, do every single thing that comes across. I do a trillion things at once. Because I know that some of us have heard the phrase, curiosity killed the cat, but then in reality, the phrase goes as, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. So have those curiosity caps on and have something to look forward to every single day, alongside being ready for every challenge that life throws at you. Speaking of challenges, so I believe that most of us have suffered from this one crisis that is defining our self-worth. Especially coming from a country like India, there were countless people who looked at my parents and went like with that sympathetic nod. And then there are some people who think that I'm cursed by a goddess. And the biggest concern of them all, not in all sarcasm, is that who will marry such a girl? And once again, like quite the rebel mother said, that my self-worth is defined by me and me alone. Me and my actions. It is not affected by the society or its idea of who I should be and what should I do. So now, once again, marriage wasn't the goal. And there you have it. Marriage, beauty, and modesty. The holy trifecta for Asian women. And coming back to beauty. So now there's some people who alienate me even when they mean in my good interest. Vitiligo is not beauty spots. So they do not make me a beauty pageant winner, just as they do not make me ugly. Now, some people would think that this thought in itself is so disoriented and hypocritical, but my only demand, this is deemed as one, is that for once I would like to be looked at as a normal human being. So just as some people are fair and some people are dark, somewhere across the spectrum, there are people like me. Now, with that, one message that I want to leave before I go is that you will have struggles of your own and those of people around you. Do not forget to curate a compassionate life. Giving back is just as important as surviving. Speaking on this platform, for me, is not about fame. It's about bringing to light lives of people like me. Vitiligo is inseparable from my body. It is inseparable from me. It is a part of my identity, but it is not my identity. It is a part of who I am, but it is not who I am. I am much more than that. And for the record, I'm actually quite proud of what I am and who I am like. I am who I wanted to be, and yet I have a long way to go. So I might not be that billionaire on the billboards or that supermodel on the ramp, but I am Marsha Balani, and my biggest strength is that nobody can be me, and nobody can take that away from me. So be you, be fearless, be the master of your own destiny. Thank you, everyone. I hope that you had a great time.
Wow, wasn't that such an inspirational speech, Alaris?
Yes, it was breathtaking. However, all good things must come to an end. We have now come to the end of our TEDx event.
Thank you very much for your kind attention.
We would like to invite the team behind this event on stage, 8 individual students from the Envoy Club.
The members are Ethlyn Huang Meizi, So Yonshu, Keiji Yamamoto, Michael Chung, Hitesh Kishnani, Jasper Tan, Sandhya Bhagwani, and Teo Zhishi Alaris.
Thank you very much for your efforts for organizing this event.
We would also like to thank our supervising teacher, Miss Sen, who has overseen this project. A round of applause for Miss Sen, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I thank you very much for your participation in this seminar. We hope you enjoyed this program very much. Thank you and have a nice day.